Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We are now well into our fourth season, and we remain just as excited as from the beginning to continue to help you explore and understand that unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen today as we interview experts for our continuing theme for this month on plastics and plastic pollution. And today we're going to focus on how and why plastic pollution is indeed a climate change issue. Now, as we go about our daily lives and we use and throw away many different kinds of plastics, we often don't know or even think about how plastics and plastic pollution is affecting our environment and our health. Plastic fills our dumps, our homes, and oceans. And plastic debris is found absolutely everywhere, from the Arctic to Antarctica. It clogs street drains in our city. It litters campgrounds and national parks, and of course, just the sides of our roadways. The amount of plastic waste that is not recycled is indeed a major environmental issue. Plastic pollution has also a direct impact on the environment because plastics are non-biodegradable. That is, they do not break down naturally in the environment. And this means that plastics can remain in our environment for hundreds of years, polluting our land and water resources. And plastic pollution is especially damaging to marine life and its ecosystems because it can become ingested by animals and sea life. Plastic pollution is indeed on the rise, and it has a direct impact on human health. When plastic waste breaks down, it releases toxic chemicals into the environment that can be, and most often are, ingested by humans as well as animals, as we mentioned earlier. And these chemicals can cause a range of health problems, including respiratory issues, skin irritation, and cancers. And in addition, microplastics, which represent the breakdown of most plastic materials, has been found in drinking water and food sources, which can be and are ingested by humans and, again, leading to and causing a number of health issues. Now, in order to reduce plastic pollution and its impact on climate change, it's important to reduce the amount of plastic we use because getting rid of all plastic also causes problems for the planet. Just about 16% of plastics are recycled, and the rest goes to landfill or incineration, or it's just dumped. Now, plastic incineration is also a big problem. Open burning of waste is common, though, in many parts of our world and indeed is a major source of air pollution. Burning plastics releases a cocktail of poisonous chemicals that damage the health of the planet and the people as they're exposed to this polluted air. Now, much of the plastic that doesn't make it to recycling or is not incinerated ends up in our rivers and our oceans. And not only is this a danger to the animals and plants whose habitats have become basically aquatic garbage patches, but it also poses a threat to the climate as plastic releases greenhouse gases as it slowly breaks down, and all of that breakdown activity is exacerbated by the sunlight and the heat. Now, plastic is one of the most persistent pollutants on Earth. It's made to last, and indeed it does last, often for 400 years or more. And at every step in its life cycle, which we're going to talk about in depth today, and even long after it has been discarded, plastic creates these greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to the warming of our planet. And then there's microplastics that we mentioned earlier, and even smaller plastic bits that are called nanoplastics. And we discussed that at length last week, and we found that the nanoplastics can actually permeate some of our body cells, and they are eaten by the fish that we in turn eat. And speaking of the waters, in the oceans, plastic and plastic pollution interfere with our ocean's capacity to absorb and filter carbon dioxide out of our environment. Again, just creating this vicious circle of plastic pollution and its impact on our health and environment. Now, this is a lot, but here to help us explore and unpack some of this today are two very smart people who we hope are going to make us smart like them. Today we have Katherine Owens, who goes by Kat. And Kat is a National Geographic explorer. She's a Fulbright Nehru Fellow and a professor in the Department of Politics, Economics, and International Studies at the University of Hartford in Connecticut. She is an interdisciplinary scholar who merges science, policy, and the arts on the topic of plastic pollution. Welcome, Kat. And did I get all of that right?
You did. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making time to be with us today. And our other guest is Erin Simon. Erin is Vice President of Plastic Waste Plus Business, and she works to drive positive change across industries by leading the World Wildlife Fund's Packaging and Material Science program. Erin works with businesses and industry to help them make informed, sustainable material choices for their products and their products' packaging. And prior to joining the World Wildlife Fund, Erin worked at Hewlett-Packard as a packaging engineer responsible for the design and implementation of laser jet printer and media packaging. So she was involved with a whole lot of packaging. Welcome, Erin. And did I get all of that right?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a blast from our past. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for making time to be with us today. We really appreciate it. So I want to start out with Kat. Can you tell us about the life cycle of plastics and considerations through the entire life cycle of plastics, starting with the production and how they impact our environment and our health? It's kind of like walking us through from the beginning of the end, but starting with that life cycle, which most of us never think about.
Yeah, so many plastics, not all plastics, but many plastics are made from fossil fuels. And they are connected to the problem of climate change at every stage in their life cycle. Now, it starts with the extraction of fossil fuels and the transport of those fossil fuels. So that can involve direct emissions like methane leakage or emissions from the extraction process and the footprint of those processes. And then we move on to the refining and manufacturing of plastic, which is one of the most greenhouse gas intensive industries in the manufacturing sector and one of the fastest growing. And then we get to waste management, right, where many of us are, we're purchasing plastic products and using them. Many of those products are designed to be used for a moment and then thrown away. Away is a euphemism for several different things, right? It could be that these materials are going to go in a landfill. They're going to be recycled or incinerated, each of which produces varying amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. And then where I most frequently encounter the plastic is along shorelines or riversides, the stuff that isn't landfilled or recycled or incinerated but ends up in the environment. And that's, 12 million tons of plastic enter the ocean every year. So at every stage along its life, we're interacting with that plastic, and it's having an impact on climate change.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And Erin, we only have a couple of minutes before we go to the break, but I want to get you to help me dig into something that Kat mentioned, and that was the manufacture of plastics, which you said is the most pollutant and intensive process. Could you just give our listeners just a real brief description of that manufacturing process and why it is so proliferous in terms of creating pollutants and so harmful?
Well, I think manufacturing starts at extraction. right?
Okay.
So we're, as Kat mentioned, the majority of plastics today, 99% of them, in fact, are coming from fossil fuels. So that could be petroleum, so in the form of oil, or that could be in the form of natural gas. But all of those things are being extracted from the planet. And so from the moment we start that process, they're contributing to, the destruction of habitats and impacting species and local communities that are near those extraction sites. From there, they go through a process of sort of taking that barrel of oil and cracking off the different chains of carbon in order to create a whole host of materials that humans are really dependent on, things that power vehicles, they energize they power our homes, and also they make chemicals, which are in turn made into plastics, right? So there's a number of processes then that we go through to create polymers and then go into making materials, which is we might extrude that into a film, we might blow it into a bottle, but ultimately all of those processes require energy and can have emissions associated with them. And that's just in making the plastics in the first place. That's not even in use or in recovery or lack of recovery, as Kat mentioned.
Indeed, and thank you. That did give us just a brief window into why it's so intensive. They've got that barrel of oil, and they absolutely have to put something in it, or take it and spin it out and take things out. But that absolutely has to be done in order to make plastics. And that's just a starting point, because I imagine depending on if they want to make hard plastic, film plastic, plastic bags or whatever, then they have to put some more stuff in it and take more stuff out. And that's what I wanted people to see, because we never see or think about all of that. All we see is the plastic in our toys, the plastic on our dashboard, or the plastic bags or the wrapping. And we never think about all that went into making what we perceive to be that simple material. But thank you for that. We're going to go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side to really dig deep into this. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, H-E-B stores, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show on plastics and plastic pollution, how and why plastic pollution is a climate change issue. And we are back with Kat Owens with the University of Hartford at Connecticut and Erin Simon with the World Wildlife Fund. Again, thank you all for being with us today. Now, I want to go back to Erin and talk a little bit about why is plastic and plastic pollution a concern for the World Wildlife Fund? You know, when you hear that word, WWF, we're thinking about wildlife. But they reached all the way over to get a plastics expert and a prior proliferator of plastics from the Hewlett-Packard days. So tell us about that, Erin. Why is that a concern for the WWF?
Yeah, well, I think you sort of gave me a great lead in with, World Wildlife Fund is one of the world's leading conservation networks. We're in over 100 countries, and our mission is quite simple, right? It's to help people in nature thrive by conserving wildlife and protecting the environment and combating the climate crisis. And so we have to do this with science and local solutions and really to sort of address those major challenges facing our world today. And that, of course, includes the growing plastic pollution problem. I know you teed it up, but there is about 11 million metric tons of plastic pollution entering our oceans every year right now. That equates to about a dump truck a minute. And a recent Pew study that came out last year said that if we don't do anything, if we change nothing, that by 2040, we will generate twice as much plastic as we are today, which will lead to 3 times as much entering our oceans, which is 3 dump trucks a minute. And that should end up being about 4 times as much just persisting in nature. So just to sort of like give you a little perspective, that's about 50 kilograms of plastic pollution per meter of global coastline. And that's the impact when the plastic is already made, is already used, and is ending up in nature, impacting communities and wildlife. That doesn't even take into consideration what a huge mismanagement of the Earth's resources it represents in the first place, right? UNEP data shows us that we're already overusing the Earth's biocapacity. So that's the Earth's ability to continue to renew the things that we as humans depend on by 56%. So we're using more than the planet can provide for us. And we, last year we hit Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day when we've used up that year's allotted amount of resources on July 28th. So just a little over halfway through the year. So we are way overusing what the planet can provide for us. And in terms of plastic, we're just throwing it away, right? We're just, and so for World Wildlife Fund, that impacts not just species and communities, it impacts all of our ecosystems that we're trying to protect. So oceans, freshwater, forestry, terrestrial, and it impacts our food systems. And therefore, tying back to the entire purpose of this podcast, it has a huge impact on the climate. And so for us, the issue of plastic pollution is one that is taking top priority for our organization. And so that's why we've been spending the last decade plus working on it. So.
Indeed. Thank you. Kat, and this is something that just really occurred to me as we were talking just now, and that is, would we be any better off, or maybe I should word that, how much better off would we be, if any, if, by some real stretch of the imagination, all plastics were disposed of properly and well?
That's a great question because, in my opinion, no, we wouldn't be that much better off because a lot of what we do, I think, in the United States is really kick the can down the road. I've done research in other countries where they do not have good waste infrastructure, and the debris is everywhere. It piles up, and when rains come through, it is right on everyone's doorsteps, literally. In the United States, we're better at hiding it. So we put it in a landfill or we put it in an incinerator. But those are both really just kind of pushing the impacts down the road. And those do have soil and water and air impacts, environmental impacts. And then recycling is often sort of put forward as a solution, but it's a very limited solution. Most of our plastics were not actually designed to be recycled. We've kind of put a system in place after the fact to try to downcycle some of them, but we are failing. 95% of plastic packaging globally is not recycled, and 90.5% of all plastic ever made has never been recycled. So I think even sort of what we think of as like the right bins to put them in doesn't lead to a real solution. One of my collaborators likes to say, if you walked into your bathroom and the water was flowing over the side of the tub, what would you do first? Would you grab a towel and start mopping it up, or would you turn the water off? And I think we need to think of those solutions as, what's about turning off the tap versus just trying to fix the effects down the road.
Indeed. I know one of our guests last week on our show on why plastic pollution is so bad really told us that the concept of recycling was designed to make us feel good or feel like we were doing something. But most of all, I was really shocked to find out from them that much of what we think we are recycling or much of what we think is being recycled is not being. Yeah, Erin, can you weigh in on that for us?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I think we have to turn off the tap before we bring out the mop, right? That's really important. And that really starts with reducing how much we depend on that material in the first place. But I do want to highlight, and this is important for everybody, that at the end of the day, there are still plastics that are going to be used, right? And we do need to recover them. And so what is needed to fix this broken system that we have today is reduction of the use, move to sustainable sources, so recycled content or sustainably sourced bio, whatever that is. We need to move to renewable sources for any material, and then we need to get it back, whether that's through reuse, through recycling, through compost. So that infrastructure for getting it back, the investment in it, the technology, the policy, the behavior change that comes afterwards, that still has to happen. So I guess I'm saying that because I don't want people to believe that just because recycling is broken now, that it will always be, that you should give up on it. I need you to keep trying because we're working right now to have policymakers fix that system to drive investment, to ask producers and users of plastic to be financially accountable for the recycling and recovery of those. And we're doing that. But once that system gets fixed, I don't want everyone to be so, jaded by the systems of today that we give up on trying to fix them for tomorrow, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. So when I go back to Kat, so how do plastics impact, cause, and contribute to climate change? Can you kind of connect the dot on that for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with extraction and transport. And I mentioned before that it can happen directly as you're extracting the fossil fuels. I think, what we need to remember is that decisions have to be made at every step along the way, and how those decisions are made make an impact. So, for example, in terms of the extraction and transport, in the Northeast where I live, there's been a conversation for the last decade around fracking. And I think many people thought, okay, this is maybe a necessary decision that we're making because people need to, stay warm in winter. And I think many people in my region would be surprised to know that a lot of that fracked gas is actually being used to create plastics. Just outside of Pittsburgh in November of last year, a $6 billion plastic plant went online, which will be producing 1.6 million metric tons of plastic each year. And if that was sort of presented to us as the debate, I think we would have thought very differently about it. In terms of refining and manufacturing, the refining, as I said before, is one of the most greenhouse gas intensive industries. There's an ethylene plant in Baytown, Texas, that's estimated to release up to 1.4 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year.
Now, where do we most often come in contact with ethylene in terms of its use or what have you?
Sam, Erin might know better than I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's what you're talking about. Polyethylene, it could be in a low-density polyethylene that's a plastic bag, right? High-density polyethylene is like a milk jug. So those are just two examples. So I would say that probably people are coming into contact with them in their extruded form. Pretty common.
Your milk jugs. I like that. But I think that's important so people know, because all we see is kind of like the cuddly, ubiquitous plastic bags and things and jugs. But this is where they come from. And I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kat. I interrupted you on that.
Of course, you can interrupt me at any time. So it's in that refining and the manufacturing of those products, the thin plastic bags or the heavier milk jugs, that a lot of climate gases are being released. And then in waste management, it comes down to the differences between landfilling, recycling, and incinerating. Each of those produce greenhouse gas emissions. Experts are expecting incineration to grow in the coming decades. But I think we really don't have a sense of how long many plastics last. One statistic I like to use is that if Shakespeare had worn disposable diapers, those diapers would still be on the planet today. And that can kind of help us understand how long it's going to take for these materials to break down. And then, as you mentioned before, when it's actually not disposed of properly and it's out in the environment, as it degrades, it's also going to be breaking down and producing climate gases.
Thank you. We're going to go to break now, but afterward, we're going to continue this very interesting conversation. Thank you. We'll be back with Kat Owens from the University of Hartford and Erin Simon with the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you all. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. To our show on plastics and plastic pollution, focusing on how and why plastic pollution is a climate change issue. And we are back with Kat Owens from University of Hartford and Erin Simon with the World Wildlife Fund. Again, thank you all for being with us. I want to go to Erin now and ask if you can connect the dots and give us some examples to our listeners why it's not an option but a necessity that we all care about the impact of plastic pollution on wildlife. Can you give us some examples of how plastics and plastic pollution are impacting or affecting some specific wildlife, and then how that impacts us and why we should care?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think coming back to from where plastic starts and to where it often ends up, it's got a huge sort of overlap across basically the whole life cycle and therefore the whole planet of how it's impacting us, right? So it's impacting everyone. And if we don't do anything, we are likely to have just a much bigger problem on our hand within the next few decades. So whether you care about species, as of late, we know that the latest number we've had is over 2,000 species on the planet have come into contact with plastic. That's either through ingestion or entanglement. So that's a widespread impact across habitats and regions. However, because most plastic is often dumped in waterways, that those are freshwater and ocean environments have some of the greatest threats against them. We know that over 90% of seabirds and 52% of sea turtles have mistakenly eaten plastic. And if we don't sort of solve for that, it's projected that by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean, right? Now, if you are not a person who is super passionate about the environment or about species, and you care more about people, I mean, we know that it's affecting people everywhere, right? Whether you're talking about fence line communities where they're being impacted by production, whether you're talking about coastal communities where fish stocks are being depleted by the presence of plastic pollution, impacting those communities, not just their livelihoods, but their sources of food. Or if you are just an individual who doesn't like trash on your sidewalks or in your playgrounds, this is an issue that truly does impact all of us. So I feel like rallying all of the key stakeholders to help us solve this pretty complicated and systematic issue has not been difficult because of how greatly that impact has been. So I hope that answered the question for you. I kind of tried to cover a number of pieces of it.
Indeed. But Erin, do you think that plastic pollution is worse or impacts animals more or humans, and why so, and how are they interconnected?
I think that if it's impacting one or the other more, I mean, that's a tough question to answer because honestly, I think plastic is impacting both, right? It's impacting human communities. Now, I'll be honest, we're still trying to figure out the human health impacts of this issue, right? Like the science for being able to measure toxicity and bioaccumulation of those toxins through food chains is still new, right? We have proof that humans are ingesting or breathing in plastic regularly. It is our general scientific assumption that that is not good, but do we know what that leads to? We are still developing the measurement tools to figure out how far those toxins accumulate, right? But we do have evidence of impacts from production in fence line communities and impacts of the prevalence of waste and pollution in coastal communities, in open dumps and burning, in disease-bearing insects collecting around pollution and trash that are impacting communities, right? So I would say from that perspective, obviously humans are greatly impacted. And then we have the evidence that I just mentioned, over 2,000 species. So at the end of the day, solving this problem is not going to be a competition of who gets impacted the most, right? It's about saying we know what the problem is, we know what the solutions are, and now it's about trying to get the global community to come together with a set of solutions that will work for all of those impacted parties.
Are there any particular animal populations, though, that perhaps are more so impacted by plastic pollution?
So some of the studies we have said, like I said, are coming back to seabirds and sea turtles, right, from ingestion. And a lot of that is because the seabirds are showing up and we have a lot of data showcasing sort of the impaction. So impaction means a species has eaten so much of something that is not digestible and therefore gets full and starves to death. And so both seabirds and sea turtles tend to ingest a lot of plastic. But honestly, entanglement is a huge problem. When we talk a lot about plastics right now, most people think about it in the plastics that we see and come in contact with every day. There is a huge portion of plastics out there that is called ghost gear or derelict fishing gear, which these are fishing nets or lines or hooks that are abandoned for whatever reason, but they continue to fish, right? And so they are catching and entangling and killing species because they're out there doing what they were designed to do, but aren't being utilized, right? And so that's 80% of the plastic pollution, 20% of the plastic pollution that is in the oceans today is from that derelict fishing gear, that ghost gear. 80% of it is coming from land. So we talk a lot about the solutions on land, but obviously that's having a great deal of impact on a larger amount of species, whether it could be cetaceans, so that's whales, the sea turtles, or just huge stocks of fish that we know from overfishing and other issues. We are already depleting in many different ways on this planet. So I think this continued plastic pollution just as an additive threat to all of these species who are already sort of threatened by a lot of human activities.
I want to move back to Kat, too. And are you aware of, I guess, what regions of the globe may be more impacted by plastic pollution?
That's an interesting question, and it's one that I address a lot because you can read in the scientific literature where they talk about the 10 dirtiest rivers or the top polluting countries. But I think that there's more to the story than that. They're overwhelmingly in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And a big part of that is that you're talking about high density population living near coastal areas without good waste infrastructure. But I think in some ways that's kind of an unjust characterization of the problem because I'm an American mom and I see plastic every day and use it every day. But it goes back to that story I told a little bit earlier. I think in the U.S. we're better at hiding it, but we're all contributing to this problem, and it's really, truly global in nature.
So for the most part, perhaps those countries that I dare to say don't have as an effective of a waste management system as we do, and I hate to call our waste management system effective, but
it's effective in some ways. Yeah. But it's sort of funny because it's about how you define the problem. If the problem is we need more waste infrastructure, well, we are already showing that that's not enough of a solution in the United States, right? Because despite our enviable waste infrastructure, I'm sure any road you drive on any day of the week, you see litter and debris when you do that.
Indeed. Kat, too, I want to talk a little bit more about the health impacts. But before I get to the usual, I want to talk about, we hear a lot about environmental issues and their health impact, but across the board, there seems to be an overlooking or not as much discussion or acknowledgement about the mental health impacts. So can you help our listeners understand how and why plastic pollution impacts mental health?
Yeah. I mean, it's something I deal with a lot as a teacher, as a university professor, because when you're informing people about a topic, you want them to be well informed, but not depressed or hopeless about it. And I can only imagine, being as a mom, I can only imagine being a mom in a community where the air outside is harmful for your children and the kind of anguish you would feel sending them outside to play every day. So I think we have to have kind of a balance of being advocates for an issue but staying hopeful and healthy about it. I think young people are a little better at articulating that frustration. They might say, I have climate anxiety. Someone in their 20s might say that, whereas someone my age probably wouldn't think about it that way. But I do think people my age, late 40s, early 50s, feel frustration when they go to the grocery store and they try to do the right thing, but they find that the options are not there. So I think we have to think about the mental health part of it and protect our mental health and try to find solutions.
Thank you. And we just have a little while before we go to break. But I want to start talking, and we'll continue this on the other side of the break with you, Kat, about some of the other health impacts, or about the history of health impacts, or the history of health effects of plastic pollution. It seems as though every day we find out about some other issue or impact.
Yeah, I think, it's big news right now as researchers are going through sort of different systems of our body and collecting new data. And, there in recent articles have come out about microplastics being found in human blood or in human lung tissue. I think more worrying is finding microplastics in human placenta or in meconium, which is the first poop that a newborn takes. The idea that our youngest members of society are being exposed to these chemicals that we really don't understand the impact of. As Erin was saying, there's no good way to test the impact of these different chemicals on humans. And so we're sort of running a giant experiment that we're all a part of.
Indeed. We're going to go to break now, but we will continue this after the break. We'll be back with Katherine Owens with the University of Hartford at Connecticut and Erin Simon with the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you all. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in Whole Food Markets, Natural Grocers, Central Markets, HEBs, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at NADallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on plastics and plastic pollution, focusing on how and why plastic pollution is a climate change issue. And before the break, we were talking with Kat about some of the health impacts, and she was really, helping us try to understand the mental health impact. But Katherine, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other health impacts that you had started talking about. And what I've begun to realize, though, after doing this show for 3, now going on 4 years, is that a lot of the health impacts, for the most part, all of them that we're seeing, are not new. What is new is our ability to know about it or to research it or to see it. Mm-hmm. We've got new, better methods. It's like the microplastics, the nanoplastics have probably been there before now, but we just now have been able to see them, know them, measure them. That's heartening to know that research and science is moving ahead. But what else do we know about health impacts and what we know about them?
Yeah. So we know that when plastics are being refined, that people who live near refineries are more likely to have higher lung cancer rates and other cancers, increased incidence of asthma, negative pregnancy and birth outcomes, and higher rates of ADHD. It can be very hard, as you can imagine, imagine the scientific study that would capture this, right? It can be very hard we don't, for many good ethical reasons, you can't just have a population and subject them to these chemicals and try to understand what the impact is. So we're kind of pulling that data from other places. But it's important to remember, too, that just like with other industries, the refining and the manufacturing is going to be impacting Black and brown communities more in the United States. And I think that's true globally as well. Microplastics have been found in the air, in tap water, in sea salt, in bottled water, in beer, and in some of the fish that humans eat. And you mentioned really early on, Bernice, that plastics have those toxic chemicals that are added along the way. So according to the Endocrine Society, plastics contain and leach hazardous chemicals, including endocrine disrupting chemicals that can threaten human health. But we are still learning, what those impacts are and trying to understand how different chemicals might work in concert, how they might affect different people. And it's not a sort of like an A to B line. It's much more complex than that.
And I guess one of the concerns that are expressed is the fact that because your minority, low-income communities tend to live in closer proximity to the plants and the manufacturing facilities, certainly they get a higher dose. I think that's how it's been placed to make it understandable. They get a higher dose of it, but all of us have exposure. And I think that's what we want to bring to light so that everybody knows that to care is not an option, that we must care. As well, we must care that the low-income and minority communities are getting a higher dose because they are essential workers.
Right. The air and water don't know boundaries. Right?
They really
so they're
don't.
going to move beyond countries and all of that. Yeah.
My favorite example that I use, and it may be that I'm getting to use this example almost every week on each show, is the Saharan red dust. But I use that example because everybody has probably seen it. And if you haven't seen it, you may have heard about it because the weathermen talk about it when it comes. And so we know, everybody knows and they see and they accept and they know it's a reality that dust comes all the way from Africa over here to the U.S. and we see it. And our allergies let us know it's here. And so just like that dust is traveling through all of our airways and creating pollution, so does everything else that gets in the air and causes pollution, including plastic and chemicals and the rest.
Absolutely.
So I think that's, and so I'll conclude that now and wait till the next show to mention it again. But Kat, continuing that, you say that we need to consider the health cost at every stage of plastics pollution. Are there any statistics that you can give us to help us realize or help us fathom the magnitude of this impact?
In terms of the health impacts, it's mostly the things I've already shared about lung cancer rates and other cancers and asthma, that kind of thing. I mean, we know that the global plastics industry freely states on publicly available materials that they want to increase production every year. And so we can rest assured in the fact that they are not trying to reduce. And so we need to approach it from another perspective, I think.
I want to go to Erin now, though. Erin, what are you all seeing, though, across the globe that's working to decrease the effects of plastic and plastic pollution on our wildlife and its habitats?
So at the end of the day, we talked about the fact that plastics don't, we're misusing them by using too much of them, and we are letting them, end up in nature where they don't belong, impacting people and communities. And so the theory we have is that we work across the system in which plastic exists, the life cycle of plastic, and where the stakeholders are who are using it, and try to influence them to, reduce that impact. And so working with businesses, we've asked them to reduce what they're using, to get rid of what they don't need, to move to those sustainable inputs, moving to more recycled content, more sustainably sourced bio-based, more reuse, and then really to invest in and advocate for infrastructure and policies to recover those materials. We're obviously working closely with governments all over the world, not just in places where plastics are ending up, but those who are in the headquarters of where most of the plastic is being produced and used, i.e. the U.S., and really focusing on how we advocate for policy to address the plastic pollution issue, how we look at infrastructure and investment in systems and consumer behavior change. And we're seeing, I'll say that I am hopeful, coming back to the mental health issue, I'm hopeful, more hopeful than I have been in a long time because of the progress that's being made in the global treaty negotiations. So the UN has come together. They've agreed to adopt a treaty. They've agreed to negotiate a treaty over the next 2 years for adoption. And when we had the first negotiating meeting in Uruguay this past November, and I was really pleased to see the level of ambition coming out of not only governments, but also businesses who are there to advocate for that change. This is a really important confluence of alignment because businesses at the end of the day are going to be accountable for solving this, right? Whether it's in the design changes or in paying for the recovery of it. And governments need to have the assurance that businesses will help them to do that. So that's really important. I want to highlight also that Kat was correct. Like there are parts of the value chain that have no intention of doing some of those things like reducing the amount of plastics that are produced. And so it is not, we haven't found our path forward in the direction that I think we have hoped for just yet. But ultimately, I think we're on the right path. But, public polling shows us that overwhelmingly people support this, right? They are showing up, signing petitions. The general public I'm talking about, taking pledges and asking a million questions, right? About all these issues that are the topic of this podcast, how it's impacting them, how they can help, how they can drive that change. So I think that the right levers are being pulled. We have all the tools in our toolbox to solve this. It's just about taking the right action and sort of moving forward with those solutions so that no plastic is ending up in nature anymore and we aren't sort of wasting the resources that the planet provides for us in the first place.
Are there any government policies that exist or that perhaps could be on the horizon that either of you feels can be or has been or will be effective in terms of putting a dent in plastic and plastic pollution?
Well, I think for one, there's one body of policy that has existed and it's growing, and that's expended producer responsibility, or EPR. And what this means is that essentially the company who is putting that product on the marketplace pays for the recovery of that. Right now, that just is about recycling. We need to expand that to cover all of waste, right? We need a system to recycle. We need a system to reuse. So that's the collection, the cleaning, the refill. We need a system to manage all of those organic wastes, right? We know that a lot of that waste is organic. And I'm not just talking plastics here too, because municipal solid waste is a shared system. So all of these materials need to go into that. Another one is deposit return systems, DRS. And those are really focused on, like, you pay a fee to take the thing and then you get that money back, and that money
like we used to do with glass bottles, soda bottles.
Yeah, the old milkman, right?
Yeah.
So these are both mechanisms that can create a funding for the infrastructure. And that's a big piece. That's a gap right now, right? We don't have infrastructure because there's not the municipal, financial access to cover that. And especially in areas of the world where those communities are facing a whole host of economic challenges, not just waste, right?
Are there any countries or places in the world where some of this may be happening or being experimented with?
Yeah, so Germany has always had an EPR system that's been pretty effective. Canada has EPR along with compost. The U.S. even has EPR now. The first ever EPR is in Colorado as of June of last year. But I just want to highlight here, policy is not enough.
Indeed. Like in Colorado where they're doing it, it's plastic, and is it working? Is it something that you think can be duplicated?
I absolutely think it can be duplicated. The EPR system that put into place in Colorado is like a basic EPR. And it was done in partnership with the beverages companies, with Walmart. So you've got the right players there saying we're agreeing to do this together, and I think that there's that potential for a broader scale of that.
Indeed. It seems like even though they can't solve the issue too, I think it definitely heightens the awareness of it among the general public, and so hopefully that can spread over to more. Ladies, we are at the end as always. There's never enough time, but we really do appreciate you helping us out with this and making us smarter. We have been with Katherine Owens with the University of Hartford in Connecticut today, and Erin Simon with the World Wildlife Fund. Again, thank you, ladies. We are smarter, not as smart as you, but certainly smarter, and I think certainly more sensitized about plastic pollution. And thank you, audience, for listening in to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your homes, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and even in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. But each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in today, and join us again next week for more on plastics and plastic pollution. Thank you.